Imagine just for a second that you are anticipating a reunion with an old friend.
Oh, that is always a stressful situation.
Right. And not just someone you haven't seen in like a few months, but someone you haven't seen in decades.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a completely different level.
It is. You know, that specific kind of anxiety.
Yeah.
You start wondering how they've changed, what their life has been like, and perhaps most terrifyingly, how you have changed.
Exactly. Because you start to, hyperanalyze how much older you look or how much heavier your worldview has become.
Yeah, or you wonder whether the invisible thread that connected the two of you has simply snapped under the weight of passing time.
Because that underlying tension always centers on whether the shared frequency is still broadcasting,
For sure.
I mean, human relationships require maintenance. So when you strip away the daily context and add a massive chronological gap, you are essentially meeting a stranger who just happens to share a few of your oldest memories.
Right. Now, take that anxiety and multiply it by an absolute cosmic scale. What if that old friend you're waiting for is an ageless extraterrestrial being?
That's quite the curveball.
I mean, and this reunion doesn't happen at, like, a local coffee shop in broad daylight. It involves a literal spacecraft descending in the dead of night.
Which is exactly what we're getting into today.
Yes. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling apart a really beautiful translated poem today that details this exact scenario.
It's such a fascinating piece.
It chronicles an incredibly unconventional reunion set in a hyper-specific earthly geography, beginning upon the rock at Danagala Mountain.
Yeah, and that setting is where the emotional architecture of this entire narrative is built.
How so?
Well, the narrator is recalling a memory of staying on that specific rock at Danagala at night. It's a past encounter that locked in a destined day to meet again.
Right, because Danagala is a real place.
Exactly. It's a distinct circular rock formation in Sri Lanka, completely isolated, often surrounded by heavy jungle canopy.
Oh, wow.
So establishing this geological anchor is vital because it tethers a supernatural cosmic event to dirt, stone, and, terrestrial reality.
The juxtaposition between the mundane and the cosmic is just so sharp here. Like, the narrator describes wandering across the plains of Valaya, secretly searching during the New Year holidays.
Right.
I've always viewed this as sort of like sneaking away from your family's holiday dinner.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. You slip out the back door while everyone is celebrating inside, completely oblivious to go meet a UFO in the jungle.
Which is wild.
But I want to dig into that timing for a second. Why the New Year?
Well, think about the mechanics of a New Year holiday. It is fundamentally a human celebration of our planet completing one orbit around the local star.
Right. It's literally just our planet moving.
Yeah. It is our way of keeping time, of marking our own aging and our cyclical, grounded existence.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So the narrator is physically leaving a celebration of human planetary time to go meet an entity that operates completely outside of it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The text creates a hard boundary between the communal human world of cyclical celebration and the profound, isolated experience of the narrator.
And that isolation escalates into something physically uncomfortable too.
Right.
Because the narrator doesn't just wait in a field.
No, they don't.
They retreat into what the text translates as a dark, silent, deserted teacher's quarters, describing the intense loneliness of a deserted, lonely hut.
Yeah, it's very bleak.
And the text explicitly notes they are trembling while waiting for the craft to arrive.
Which is a very visceral detail.
Right. The natural assumption is fear, but considering the 40-year wait, I'd argue it's a physiological overload.
How do you mean?
Like, the nervous system can't differentiate between terror and absolute consuming anticipation. You're just shaking.
I totally agree. The physical trembling is the body's reaction to entering a liminal space.
A liminal space.
Yeah, think about the location itself. A deserted teacher's quarters is incredibly symbolic. A teacher's quarters is typically an epicenter of human pedagogy, right? It's a place associated with the accumulation and passing down of earthly knowledge and community.
For sure.
So stripping it of that function, rendering it dark and silent, turns it into a vacuum. The narrator has separated themselves from human knowledge and society to prepare for cosmic knowledge. You cannot bring the noise of your everyday life into an encounter of this magnitude.
I like that, but I'd actually push back slightly on calling it preparation for cosmic knowledge.
Oh, why is that?
Well, reading through the text, it doesn't really feel like the narrator is waiting for enlightenment or universal secrets.
True.
They are just waiting for a friend. And facing that deserted waiting room alone means confronting the brutal reality of their own physical decay.
Ah, yes, the passage of time.
Because the poem states clearly that it has been 40 years since their first journey together.
Right.
That brings us to the core tension of this encounter.
Mm-hmm.
The narrator mournfully admits they have grown old, and they lament that they can no longer offer the same smile or the babbling words they shared before.
You know, the specific phrasing of babbling words offers a really brilliant psychological insight.
It really does. It's so evocative.
It points to a loss of innocent, uncalculated communication. When we are young, connection is often effortless. We babble, we share without filtering.
We don't overthink it.
Exactly. But over 4 decades, the narrator hasn't just lost their physical youth, they've lost that linguistic innocence.
Wow. Yeah, the heaviness of a human lifetime has layered them with filters, traumas, and hesitations.
They feel inadequate because they can no longer access the pure, unfiltered frequency they once shared with this entity.
There is a deep insecurity there. Because, aging alongside a human friend carries a certain camaraderie.
Misery loves company, right?
Yeah, you both get gray hair, your joints ache, your memories fade at the same pace. But this poem denies the narrator that shared decay.
It really does.
The entity finally arrives, and the text describes him as looking exactly the same. A tall, youthful giant.
What a contrast.
That visual contrast feels almost cruel, honestly. You wait 4 decades, completely broken down by the friction of earthly time, and the being you are waiting for is entirely untouched by it.
Cruel, perhaps, but it serves to strip the human narrator of any remaining ego.
How so?
Well, time is the ultimate humbler, but usually we measure it against peers who are aging alongside us.
Right against our own baseline.
Exactly. So standing before an eternal, unchanging entity forces the narrator to confront their own impermanence in a stark, isolated vacuum. It exposes the fragility of human biology compared to cosmic longevity.
Which totally explains the subsequent reaction. The narrator experiences what the poem beautifully translates as a wave of tears that split the deep darkness.
It's a very forceful, violent release.
But let's look at the mechanics of that phrase. The tears don't just fall, they split the darkness.
Yes, that active verb is important.
In a room devoid of light, where the narrator is hyper-focused on their own inadequacy and the giant's imposing presence, the physical act of weeping breaks the tension.
It is the first authentic, unfiltered action the narrator takes.
Exactly. If they can no longer offer babbling words, they can offer raw, unfiltered grief.
And that physical release acts as the catalyst for the narrative shift.
Things change pretty fast after that.
They do. The emotional weight reaches its absolute breaking point on the floor of that dark hut, and the text immediately counters it with elevation.
Literally.
Yes. The narrator physically boards the vessel. The poem states they are rising into the sky, seated in the vessel, triggering an immediate transition from the dense, isolated gravity of Earth to the vastness of the sky.
The perspective shift here fundamentally alters the narrator's relationship with their own grief. Looking down from the vessel, they describe seeing the blue earth spinning playfully below.
Spinning playfully, that's such a striking phrase.
Think about the psychological mechanism at play. The overview effect, which is a cognitive shift reported by actual astronauts, forces a realization of how incredibly thin and fragile the boundary of human existence is.
Right.
So stepping out of a tiny, dark, anxiety-filled room to suddenly see the planet spinning playfully shrinks everything.
Notice the contrast in the adjectives there. Earth, when experienced from the surface, was dark, silent, deserted.
Yeah, it was heavy.
It was a place of heavy, isolating sorrow and the cruel passage of time. Viewed from the vessel, it becomes dynamic, almost toy-like.
Koi-like, exactly.
The phrase spinning playfully strips the planet of its oppressive weight. The earthly worries, the gray hair, the loss of youthful smiles, the deserted hut, they all lose their crushing density when the origin point of all that suffering is reduced to a blue marble playing in the dark.
That is beautifully put. Now, I want to look at how the environment of space itself is described, because the translation makes a very specific linguistic choice here.
The river of sky.
Yes. The narrator hears what is happening inside the mother craft and describes whirling swiftly through the river of sky.
It's very poetic.
We are so conditioned by Western sci-fi to view space as a void, a vacuum, dead, empty space that ships have to violently thrust through.
Yeah.
But river of sky implies something entirely different mechanically.
It implies fluid dynamics, currents, and natural celestial mechanics.
Right.
By conceptualizing the cosmos as a river, space becomes a living, flowing ecosystem rather than an empty abyss.
It's not a hostile void anymore.
No, the spacecraft isn't just defying gravity, it is navigating the natural currents of the universe. It brings a terrestrial logic to the cosmos.
Oh, that makes sense.
Just as they once met on the solid earthly rock of Denigala Mountain, they are now navigating the fluid river of the sky. It bridges the gap between the earthly and the extraterrestrial by making the cosmos feel navigable and alive.
I see the symmetry there, but I also wonder if it speaks to how the entity experiences travel. If you are navigating a river, you are moving with the flow of time and space, not fighting it.
Oh, I like that interpretation.
Which brings us to the entity itself. We have the lonely anticipation, the realization of aging, the ascent into the cosmic river. But none of those sci-fi elements matter without the emotional intimacy that anchors the 40-year gap.
Absolutely not. The interaction inside the mothercraft is the structural load-bearing pillar of the entire poem.
Right, because my initial skepticism of this dynamic, the frail human and the immortal giant, is that it could so easily become clinical.
Oh, totally.
An ageless extraterrestrial returning after 40 years could easily view the aged human the way a zoologist views a rapidly aging pet.
A detached anthropological curiosity.
Exactly. But the narrator gets onto the craft carrying all this insecurity, and the poem explicitly tells us that upon hearing the human's thoughts, the giant entity also remembered and was stirred by our affection.
And that phrase completely dismantles the clinical observer hypothesis.
It shatters it.
Stirred by our affection implies a mutual, deeply empathetic resonance. In so much of literature regarding extraterrestrial or supernatural encounters, beings from the stars are portrayed as hyperlogical, driven by intellect, and devoid of messy human emotions.
Like robots, essentially.
Right. But this text argues the exact opposite. Empathy is not presented as a uniquely human vulnerability. It is presented as a universal constant. The giant is capable of being moved.
The mechanics of that empathy are fascinating. The poem states that the thoughts given on that very first day, 40 years prior, at Denigala, were never forgotten by either party.
They held on to them.
Even without the easy babbling words of their youth, the core connection remained intact. The transmission of affection wasn't dependent on the narrator maintaining their physical youth or their eloquence.
Right.
The signal survived the degradation of the biological hardware.
That implies memory and affection operate on a dimension completely outside of physical time. The human body deteriorated, the human language filters hardened, but the thoughts given remain perfectly preserved. It validates the narrator's entire ordeal.
The waiting, the fear.
The secret searching during the new year, the absolute terror and trembling in the deserted quarters, confronting the brutal reality of their own decay. It was a necessary trial to reach the realization that the bond was incorruptible.
The final thesis of the poem delivers that realization so bluntly. The narrator concludes,
Though aged, our friendship remains precious to us.
Such a powerful line.
It strips away the mothercraft, the celestial rivers, the alien mountain, and leaves you with just the bare mechanics of love.
Yeah.
It posits that our bodies will inevitably fail, the clock will run out on our youth, but genuine connections forged between conscious beings do not oxidize.
And that leads right into the most profound implication of this entire encounter, specifically regarding the physics of time.
Oh, this is the part that really gets me. Let's unpack this. We discussed the psychological toll of the 40-year wait on the narrator. For the human, bound to the planetary rotation of the Earth, those 4 decades were a long, weary lifetime.
Yeah.
It was the slow, attritional process of cellular aging, of losing the smile of their youth day by day, year by year.
It's a standard human experience of time. It marches in one direction, and it drags us along with it.
But apply the concepts of relativity and time dilation to the tall, youthful giant whirling through the cosmos and the mothercraft.
Okay, my mind is already spinning.
From a purely astrophysical standpoint, navigating the river of sky at speeds capable of traversing star systems drastically alters the experience of time.
Right.
40 earthly orbits around the sun might have translated to a matter of weeks or even days for the entity.
That is, we see that concept explored heavily in hard sci-fi, like the Twin Paradox or films like Interstellar, where the disparity in time creates a tragic wedge between characters.
The tragedy of one person waiting forever.
Yeah. One ages into dust while the other barely blinks. But this poem flips that tragedy on its head.
It really does. It acknowledges the physical disparity. The human is old, the giant is young. but it refuses to let relativity dilute the emotional weight.
They experience the passage of time in fundamentally incompatible ways.
A crushing, decades-long wait for the human.
And a brief, fleeting absence for the giant.
Exactly. Yet, despite existing in entirely different relativistic frameworks, when they finally occupy the same space in that vessel, the emotional gravity of their friendship is identical.
It renders time and distance completely irrelevant to the actual connection.
It's beautiful.
The anxiety we talked about at the beginning of this deep dive, worrying if an old friend will still care, worrying if time has eroded the shared history, is a purely human insecurity tied to our linear planetary existence.
Tied to our limited perspective.
This text suggests that if a bond is genuine, it can survive not just decades of silence, but the vast, terrifying mechanics of the cosmos itself.
It really reframes everything.
It does. It invites you to look at the night sky not as a dark, empty void that separates us, but as a river carrying the connections that outlast our fragile temporary bodies.